Commander Velox stared at the void through the cracked view screen of the starward crest, counting the days since their last transmission from High Command. 97 rotations. 97 disappointing, soul-crushing rotations of absolute silence. Commander, the primary fusion cell just dropped below 18%, reported Science Officer Trill, her blue-tinged appendages tapping nervously against the console. At current consumption rates, life support will fail in approximately 22 days. Velox's facial ridges contracted in what his species considered a grimace. Any response from the emergency beacon? Nothing but background radiation and the occasional pulsar hiccup, Navigator Pax replied, not bothering to hide the bitterness in his voice. Just like yesterday. And the day before. And the 78 days before that. The catastrophic engine failure had been spectacular, a cascading quantum rupture that should never have happened with hegemony technology. The fact that they'd survived at all was considered a minor miracle among the crew of 12. The fact that they were now floating aimlessly in uncharted space with dwindling supplies? Well, that was considered something else entirely. The hegemony has abandoned us, muttered Communications Officer Nara from her station. They've written us off as acceptable losses. That's enough, officer, Velox snapped, though his hearts weren't in the reprimand. The thought had crossed his mind too many times to count. Velox floated through the ship's central corridor, the artificial gravity having been reduced to conserve power. The faces of his crew told the same story, dwindling hope replaced by simmering resentment. The Kiixari hegemony prided itself on technological superiority and community above all else. No vessel left adrift was practically their space exploration motto. Yet here they were. Adrift. Abandoned. In the mess hall, Engineer Loom and Medical Officer Saria were engaged in their daily ritual of splitting a nutrition cube into precisely measured portions. Their species required sustenance only once per rotation, but the psychological comfort of the shared meal remained important. Commander, Loom acknowledged, offering a portion that Velox knew the engineer had skimmed from his own share. The beacon? Saria asked, hope briefly flickering across her translucent features. Still transmitting, Velox replied, the words tasting stale in his mouth. Still being ignored. A sudden commotion from the bridge interrupted their meal. Pax's voice crackled through the ship's communication system, excitement breaking through the usual monotone, Commander to bridge. Unknown signal approaching fast. It's responding to our beacon. Velox moved with a speed his muscles hadn't mustered in weeks. As he reached the bridge, the crew had gathered around Pax's station, expressions caught between disbelief and desperate hope. What kind of vessel? Velox demanded. Trill looked up from her scanner, bewilderment evident in her wide eyes. That's just it, Commander. It's just one ship. A single vessel. Not hegemony. Not anyone we recognize. Whoever they are, Pax added, they're heading straight for us. Hashtag only one ship? Part 2. The unexpected saviors. The unknown vessel decelerated with alarming speed, a maneuver that made Navigator Pax wince visibly. They'll tear themselves apart at that velocity change. But the ship didn't disintegrate. Instead, it gracefully positioned itself alongside the starward crest, close enough that Velox could make out the strange angular script emblazoned across its hull, Dauntless. They're hailing us, Nara announced, surprise evident in her voice. Audio and visual. Should I accept? Velox straightened his uniform. Accept. Full diplomatic protocols. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a sight that sent a collective gasp through the bridge. The beings were bipedal, with exposed skin on their faces, an evolutionary disadvantage that suggested a gentler homeworld than most spacefaring species. This is Captain Ren Morgan of the Earth vessel Dauntless, the lead figure announced with a disarmingly wide facial gesture. We received your distress call. How can we assist? The universal translator struggled momentarily before settling on approximate meanings. Velox stepped forward. Commander Velox of the Kiixari hegemony vessel Starwood Crest. We've experienced catastrophic engine failure. Well then, let's get you fixed up, the human captain responded with bewildering enthusiasm. Zara, prep the shuttle. We're going over. A darker-skinned human with curly hair tied back nodded. Already on it, Cap bringing the weird toolkit. Within moments, their sensors detected a small craft departing the Dauntless. Velox turned to Security Chief Morex. Prepare for visitors. Standard quarantine procedures. Sir, Trill interrupted, their shuttle has no radiation shielding, minimal inertial dampeners, and, she paused, rechecking her readings, they appear to be using chemical propellants. Before Velox could process this information, the humans had already docked with impressive precision despite their primitive technology. Captain Morgan strode onto the bridge with 4 crew members, all wearing surprisingly thin environmental suits. The engineer, Zara, immediately began scanning the ship's systems with a handheld device that looked cobbled together from spare parts. Your quantum matrix is completely fried, she announced, tapping at her device. But we can jury-rig a bypass using modified components from our fusion reactor. Chief Engineer Loom's appendages fluttered in alarm. Impossible. Our systems are incompatible with whatever technology you possess. Zara grinned, a facial expression the translator couldn't adequately interpret. Watch me. Captain Morgan approached Velox directly. My engineer's the best in 3 systems. If she says she can fix it, she can. Velox studied the humans, noting their casual disregard for proper hierarchical communication and their reckless confidence. Everything about them seemed chaotic, unplanned, and yet strangely effective. Why did you come? Velox finally asked. We've transmitted for months with no response from anyone. Morgan looked genuinely confused. You needed help. We were close enough to respond. Velox's secondary eyelids flickered in disbelief. Just like that? One ship? No recovery fleet? No authorization? Sometimes one ship is all you need, Morgan replied with another incomprehensible facial gesture. Now, shall we get started? #only one ship? Part 3. The repair mission engineer Zara attacked the quantum matrix problem with what the Kiixari crew could only describe as controlled chaos. She dismantled sacred components without hesitation, rewired systems that had been engineered to specific tolerance levels, and occasionally hit stubborn machinery with a metal tool she called the Persuader. You cannot connect a tertiary power coupling directly to a quantum buffer. Loom protested, his appendages quivering with professional horror. The resonance patterns will cascade. Not if we modulate the frequency like this, Zara replied cheerfully, twisting 2 incompatible wires together and sealing them with a substance she called duct tape. The improvised connection glowed briefly, then stabilized. Loom's mouth parts opened and closed several times before he managed, that should not work. But it does, Zara winked, patting the engine housing. Sometimes you gotta ignore the manual. During a brief rest period, Velox cornered Captain Morgan in the ship's observation deck. You mentioned you were close enough to respond. Where is your support fleet? Your recovery specialists? Morgan took a sip from a container of dark liquid. No fleet. Just us. We picked up your signal during our survey mission and changed course. Without authorization? Without protocols? We sent a message to command saying we were checking it out. They'll catch up with the paperwork eventually. Morgan shrugged. Couldn't just leave you floating out here, could we? Before Velox could respond, an alarm blared. Trill's voice came over the comm, radiation spike in Engine Bay 3. Containment failure imminent. Velox and Morgan raced to the engine bay, finding chaos. A hastily modified coupling had ruptured, spewing invisible radiation. Trill was trapped behind a fallen support beam, directly in the radiation's path. Evacuation protocols. Velox ordered, knowing with sick certainty they couldn't reach Trill in time. But one of the humans, a technician named Devi, was already moving. Grabbing an inadequate radiation shield, she sprinted toward Trill, ignoring Morgan's shout to stop. The human leveraged the beam with surprising strength, pulling Trill free just as emergency barriers slammed down. Hours later, the human lay in medical, radiation burns covering 20% of her body. Why? Velox asked, genuinely confused. You risked termination for someone not of your species? Devi's pain-etched face formed a weak smile. Wouldn't you? The question haunted Velox. The hegemony's educational primers described humans as dangerously unpredictable, their lack of central planning a threat to galactic stability. Yet here they were, risking everything with no clear benefit to themselves. Later, watching Zara and Loom work together on the final repairs, Loom now eagerly suggesting his own unconventional modifications, Velox wondered what other hegemony facts about humans might be wrong. The engines hummed to life, the quantum matrix stabilizing with a blue glow. Against all odds and traditional engineering wisdom, the humans had succeeded. #only one ship? Part 4. The journey home. The Starwood Crest and Dauntless traveled side by side through the void, two vastly different vessels united by an unexpected alliance. What had begun as a desperate repair mission had evolved into something neither crew had anticipated: friendship. In the Crest's newly repaired mess hall, Captain Morgan shared a meal with Commander Velox and his senior staff. The humans had brought their own food, though Science Officer Trill had confirmed it was surprisingly compatible with Kiixari biology. I still don't understand, Velox admitted, watching engineer Zara demonstrating some Earth game involving cards to an enthralled Loom and Pax. Your government committed a single vessel to rescue an unknown alien craft, with no diplomatic advantage? No resource acquisition goal? Morgan smiled, that strange expression that Velox was starting to interpret as genuine warmth. We didn't ask permission, and we didn't need a reason beyond the fact that someone needed help. But surely you represent some galactic coalition? Some interspecies alliance? The human captain laughed. Earth's barely made contact with a dozen species. We don't have a coalition. We're just exploring, learning, helping where we can. Velox's facial ridges contracted in thought. The hegemony teaches that community survival must always supersede individual risk. Your approach seems counterintuitive. Sometimes, Morgan replied, helping others is how communities grow stronger. 3 days later, they arrived at Outpost Zenith, the nearest hegemony station. The appearance of an unknown vessel alongside a presumed lost hegemony ship triggered immediate alarm. Defense platforms activated, and communication channels filled with demands and threats. High Commander Jorex materialized on the view screen, mandibles clicking with agitation. Commander Velox. You've brought unauthorized alien vessels into hegemony space. Explain this breach of protocol immediately. Velox stood tall, a certainty in his posture that his crew hadn't seen since before the accident. The humans of Earth rescued us when the hegemony abandoned us to die. They risked their lives, shared their resources, and asked for nothing in return. They violated sovereign space. They interfered with hegemony property. They saved hegemony lives, Velox countered. While we transmitted distress signals for 97 rotations without response. A tense silence followed. Finally, Jorex spoke, voice cold. The Starwood Crest is cleared for emergency docking. The alien vessel will withdraw immediately. No, Velox replied simply. What did you say? I said no. The humans deserve our gratitude, not our suspicion. If they must leave, then I and my crew request permission to accompany them. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the bridge crew. Trill stepped forward to stand beside her commander. Then Pax. Then Loom, still holding the human playing cards. The standoff lasted 20 tense minutes before Jorex grudgingly authorized temporary docking privileges for the Dauntless, in recognition of assistance rendered. 6 months later, Velox stood proudly as the official hegemony ambassador to Earth, watching Captain Morgan sign the first human-Kiixari cooperation treaty. What had begun with one ship answering a desperate call had blossomed into the beginning of a new interstellar friendship. "You know," Morgan said quietly as the formal ceremony concluded, "sometimes the most important adventures start with the smallest choices." Velox's facial ridges formed the Kiixari equivalent of a smile. "Or with only one ship."